70% of digital transformations fail, and they fail spectacularly. So why would organizations go through that pain?
What makes a good leader to really pull together galvanized teams?
I lead with purpose. You cannot go through a transformation, any type of transformation, without the pain of change. In organizations, when you're going through any sort of change, to get people to get through it, you have to really understand the culture.
What are the key things that really spring to mind first, when it comes to businesses adopting change?
The clear issue that organizations need to really tackle is
Hi Sharon.
Hi, Matt.
Welcome to the next episode of Community Partners. Sharon joins us today as an established CIO and digital transformation leader. And we're going to use this session to jump straight into not just your journey, your career, but also just to really get under the skin of digital transformation today in 2025 and what that means in businesses today. So let's just jump straight into it. In terms of how it started early on in your career and your journey up to now, how's it been?
Gosh, well, it's been an incredible journey. Not one that I would have planned from the beginning, but I didn't actually plan to go into IT. It happened completely by accident, as I think most CIOs of my generation did. I actually came up through my CIO career starting as a typist.
Yeah.
And I became a CIO through a process that I developed in myself, which was continuous improvement, continuous learning.
Yeah.
Just going further back, where it all started with my family, both my parents are immigrants into the UK. They came to the UK from Barbados, married here, and they then ended up having 7 children, and I'm the middle child of 7.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, coming up in a busy household, life wasn't easy.
Yep.
It was always very, very challenging. But my father instilled in us a sense of really understanding how we learnt new things. So around the dinner table, he would invent a game with us to try and get us to really think differently. And one of the things was, what did we learn that day that we hadn't known when we went to bed the night before? So over the years, as you can imagine, awesome. With 7 of us around the table, it got more and more competitive. Yeah. And we just learned to learn very, very quickly. Yeah. And that's how my career started. It was just completely by accident, working as a typist, discovered a problem with our computer system at a bank that I was working at, and fixed the problem by going out, buying a book, researching it. And when the problem was fixed, my boss at the time said, "You're wasted as a typist. You've clearly got an aptitude for this. Why don't you take a career in IT?" Yeah. And that's how it started.
Okay. And it is that problem-solving mentality, yes. Right? And I think to support innovation in its first degree, I guess you've got to have that appetite for change and problem-solving, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the number one thing. You cannot go through a transformation, any type of transformation, without the pain of change. Yeah. And that's what I think a lot of organizations really are grappling with, is how to take an organization through a transformation. Yeah. And transformation in today's world, when we talk about digital, isn't just a project that you design from the start and you have an end to it. It's a continuous change. Yeah. And that's the issue I think a lot of organizations face, is how to go through continuous change and what that actually looks like.
Yeah. And where did it start for you? Like getting stuck into the first CIO role, or IT leadership role? What was the sort of the key role or key starting point in your career there?
My first CIO role was really interesting because I took a leap of faith, really, and it wasn't an easy decision to decide, I'm ready for this role. My clear aspiration is around helping organizations improve, and digital transformation is all about finding a problem and solving it using technology and process change. And the organization I walked into to start this career as a CIO was all about trying to improve their customer journeys and also to gain some growth. And the clear issue, I think, that I looked at was culturally, how do people actually embrace the change that they need to do? One of the aspects of my education was law. I did a master in law and specialised in forensic psychology. And I know law is all about criminal law and why crimes are committed and why criminals do what they do, and judges and the jury system works in the way it does. But if you translate that into corporate life, why do companies go through any sort of transformation, and why does it often fail? You know, I was looking at some stats by Deloitte, and 70% of digital transformations fail, and they fail to achieve their aspirations, or they fail spectacularly because they sunk too much money into it and it's not achieved what they wanted. So why would organizations go through that pain of a transformation, knowing that 70% of it, or 30% is going to be successful, 70% is going to fail? No one would really want to do that. So to become a CIO, my aspiration was to help organizations through that pain point and really understanding what it actually takes.
It's interesting, isn't it, where such a huge statistic of failures, you know, through a digital transformation journey. It does make you wonder, like, how much gets outsourced and how much stays within the business, you know, organically. And maybe that sort of appetite for change that sits maybe more so on the outside, and they're trying to inject that appetite of change and transformation on the internally within the business. But it's quite an interesting point of discussion, isn't it? Because I think stereotypically in this consulting advisory industry, there's so much that's quick to be outsourced to a big consulting firm, and they take ownership of that deliverable. But it is it's an interesting statistic, I mean, and not a good one to surround them, you know, through that type of model. So.
No. Well, the problem is, and again, this is where my education on forensic psychology comes in. The problem is change is instigated by people. So the technology itself is very mature. It's been around for quite a while. It's been tried and tested. And if you look at the journey of transformation, specifically digital, you know, you had process improvements with ERPs and CAD systems that came out, and then it moved into the internet era and online shopping, and then the mobile where it's always connected, and then post the pandemic, you know, it's completely changed again. So the common denominator through all this is people and how people actually adapt to change. And part of the reason why consultancies are brought in is because companies don't have the know-how internally in how to do it. But you've got to mix the two. And that's really the inflection point of that is really where leadership comes in. And that's what, for me, being a CIO is all about. How do you lead the organization through bringing two disparate cultures together of a consultancy and an existing legacy organization to actually help change and make change happen. You know, I'm really interested in, as I say, the psychology of people, but you can use other analogies like war. And if you look at the Second World War, when Churchill took the UK through success in the Second World War, everyone bills him as a really great leader. But the reality was he couldn't lead in peacetime. He wasn't a very good leader in peacetime. He was a very good leader in wartime. And if you, again, take the analogy of businesses, transformation is almost, you've got to treat it like a wartime activity. You need a different type of leader to be able to take an organization through that. And that's where consultancy and third parties and advisories come in to really help an organisation and hold their hand through that transformation.
But ruffle a few feathers along the way.
Yeah, a lot of feathers, yes. And I've stood on lots and lots of landmines in doing that. But you have to, and I think organisations, if they really want to do it, have to lead differently and think differently. And that's
I think bravely as well, because I think for me, it's quite synonymous with many different industries that we work across in public and private sectors. But you have this, the larger consultancies and this sort of outsourced model. And then I think sometimes substantive or permanent sort of leadership within the business can be like almost like hands off, like, I've outsourced it. So if it goes wrong, if it was in the complexity of a transformation program, if it went badly, well, I gave it to them. So you get this sort of blame culture inherently. But it is an interesting one. I think a brave leader within a business would maintain at least half of that accountability and bring in a consultancy or a powerhouse to support delivery, but still maintain ownership of that. And I think that's a really hard art to achieve in many businesses.
Yeah, accountability in businesses is the key issue.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. If you outsource, you're almost saying you're outsourcing the problem. You have to really be clear around what the purpose is for any transformation, and certainly with digital, it is a continuous change. So you have to be really clear on what is it we're looking to do, what's the outcome we're looking to achieve, and how are we going to help the organisation through it. But that accountability has to sit internally. You cannot outsource that to a third party. A, they don't know your business as well as you do. And B, they're not as invested in your business as you are. But you bring them in as partners in the same way that if you are rebuilding and remodeling your house, you'd bring in an architect and a set of builders to help you build it. But ultimately, you've got to live in it. So you're not going to want them to build something that you don't recognise.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to innovation, I mean, one thing that I guess we're at Community Partners are very passionate about is innovating, changing the way that consulting, advisory and recruitment is delivered in industries. And taking that a step further into digital transformation, there are so many new technologies and AI that are infiltrating so many service lines across our industries. How, and I think for some time it's been a bit of a buzzword, this whole, transformation and digital change and I think people jump on that bandwagon, but to get to the nuts and bolts of a business and how they start to drive real innovation, what are the key things that really spring to mind first, when it comes to businesses adopting change, but truly embedding change and not just, welcoming any sort of advisory input where it's just a great slide deck and one of the previous guests called them the PowerPoint fairies, where they have a very good strategy or a very good product, but actually embedding change to drive cultural, systemic change in a business, as you've alluded to. What do businesses need to do to get away from that?
It has to start with purpose, and by being really clear what it is you're trying to achieve and getting everyone behind it in the organisation. Not everyone's going to want to do it. Change resistance is a big issue. And that's one of the reasons why you have the 70% failure, because people just don't want to change. And they will complain about the speed of how the change is happening.
Even for the better,
because they are used to working in a certain way. And again, if I take the analogy of wartime, during the wartime years, England was a different place, to peacetime. And people had to change through that. And in organisations, when you're going through any sort of change, to get people to get through it, you have to really understand the culture. How are you enabling people to work and be successful in this sort of environment? So I think leadership has to be different. You have to have a different sense of pace in your leadership style. Because if you take too long to make the change happen, people get fatigued. And that's another element of resistance. If you go too fast, people don't understand what you're trying to achieve. So therefore, the message is then lost. So there is this fine balance. But I firmly believe the clear issue that organisations need to really tackle is the leadership style and the way they think.
And being that people, then that people side of a transformation program is fundamental to success. What makes a good leader to really pull together, galvanize teams, and get the best out of those people and bring them up? In some of your previous questions, you talked about sort of widening the ladder for others, supporting succession and development. What are the key sort of things for a leader, like in your role as a CIO? What are the key sort of aspects to bring these people forward to support that delivery?
Yeah, I think having a clear vision. I as I say, I lead with purpose. So I have to really be firmly in belief that what we're doing is the right thing that we need to do. So leading with purpose, I think, is really clear. The next thing is being able to communicate the message to people. Great leaders have a good fellowship. People want to follow and deliver the change because they believe in what the leader is saying. They're inspired by it. And unless you can give that message in that inspirational way, it's going to be really challenging. The other big issue, and again, this comes back to companies going through the digital transformation because it's a continuous change element. The culture is very, very different. And normally organizations have a business model and they've been running it for years and everyone's really clear on it. And there's the same type of people in those teams running those programs. But when you're going through any form of transformation, especially digital transformation, you need different thinking. So you need the diversity of thought. You need to have people in the team that are willing to make the changes and willing to make some of the sacrifices and compromises that are needed to go through the change. So what I really advocate is having very diverse teams. I'm a big believer of diversity in teams. I also like to lead with purpose. So I paint a picture that's really clear around what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to do it. And for those who want to come on the journey, it's going to be tough. But as long as they understand the journey and the purpose and the end goal of what we're going to achieve, they will go with it. And there are others who are going to be extremely resistant. And sometimes you just have to have those tough conversations with them.
And you've worked with like amazing businesses through your career, you know, from Heathrow, Ann Summers, Card Factory, GSK, Post Office, some amazing organisations, and probably seen like the good, the bad, the ugly in terms of how change is delivered.
Yes.
But you mentioned earlier on continuous improvement, and it's obviously a key point because it is about journey, isn't it? It's about continuous improvement and not just the beginning, middle and end of a program cycle, and much more about how do you continue to build new foundations for the future.
Yes.
What your experiences? I mean, give us an idea about some of the experiences you've seen. You're working with some of those organisations, good or bad. But how have you managed some of those digital transformation journeys? You know, with continuous improvement in mind.
Well, one of the benefits of having worked across industries and working in the variety sizes of organisations that I've worked in is that I've got to pick up really clear signals around what works and what doesn't.
Absolutely.
And so when I go into an organisation, I can very, very easily and quickly discover what the real issues with the organisation. So whether it's culture, whether it's investment, whether it's appetite, whether the purpose isn't completely built out, I would really quickly understand what needs to change. The bulk of my career was at GSK, where I built quite a lot of IT leadership and technology leadership skills. And it was there that I built my foundations of how to be a really good, strong leader. As I've left GSK and worked across organisations, some I've stayed for a while, some I've left very, very quickly. I can really determine whether or not my style of leadership is going to work in an organisation. So generally, this is how the conversation goes. Someone will come to me and say, look, we want to do a transformation, a digital transformation. Don't quite know what we're going to do, but we need someone who's going to come in and help us solve the problem. So in I come. And in my early career, I would go in and say, great, I can do that. I've done it before. I can do that, and rush in. And then realise very quickly there's too much resistance or it's not going to work. I've learned more from the failures of roles that I've worked in than I have from the successes. And I've had quite a lot of successes. But the failures have taught me that not all organisations will adapt to change in a way that I would expect. So in recent years, where I've worked in organisations that have been resistant to change, I've really started thinking through what will make it work in this organisation. And before I take on any role, I'm really clear, don't employ me if you're not going to be prepared to change, because to go through the scale and size of transformation you're looking for, you need to change culturally internally. So I've looked at, say, different types of industries, but I've always looked at how the people will change alongside it.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I think also you alluded to vision and purpose, and I think unless you've got that absolutely crystal clear, with clarity, it's very hard to galvanise teams behind it if they're not clear on the mission.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, and it's like any mission. I was a big fan of Sir Alex Ferguson and his heyday at Man United.
I was going to say this.
Yeah. He is a different type of leader.
Yeah.
But what he was able to do was to build a very, very strong team that the players all knew their position and they all knew how to play with each other as a team. Yeah. And transformation is exactly the same. It's a team sport.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the early days, of internet, pre-internet and internet and mobile, it was all around IT taking the lead on transformation. Post-COVID, it's completely changed. It's now agile. It's now fusion teams, business and IT working together to build the future of whatever the organisation's looking to do. So it's that team sport that I think is the new cultural change that we need to think through.
And I think that I mentioned the term brave leaders earlier, and I think the Sir Alex and the Winston Churchills, and I think it's absolutely right. And one of the things, having read his book, and clearly someone like Sir Alex Ferguson is dearly missed at the moment. Another subject, but with him, he really called himself a better manager after a loss. Yes, for him that was his thing. That if they suffered a defeat or a failure and they lost the game, he said the next morning he would be like real rampant. He'd be everywhere, sorting things out, fixing problems, addressing issues. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? And similar, carry some synergies to Winston Churchill through that time. So I think a good leader in transformation needs to be, with a diplomatic sort of head on, but be able to ruffle feathers and drive a bit of change, because people call themselves a change agent, but not really, but plugging straight into the BAU. But actually, true digital transformation is nothing to do with BAU, really. No, it's about the next phase.
It absolutely is, and I think this is the bit that's missed around the leadership style that needs to be in organisations that go through transformation. It cannot be BAU. Yeah. By its very nature, it can't be. Yeah. And because transformation is a continuous change, especially as I said, post-COVID, the continuous change element means that you've got to build that change muscle within the organisation and make sure that everyone is aligning behind it. And as I said before, a lot of people won't be happy with the change, but you've got to help them through it, or they've got to move on and do something different if they're not following the same line.
I want to talk about succession, because you've really you're such a great example in terms of a blueprint when you have particularly female tech leaders, and we know that sector is light in terms of female leaders in that industry agnostically across different settings. But I'm really for those that are listening, or particularly young up and coming CIOs, tech leaders, and particularly the female leaders, just what key things should they be considering, focusing on, thinking about, curious about? What are the key things that has been useful to you through your journey that you'd pass on to the next?
Yeah, I always look at a number of things that have to be within an organisation to make me successful, to be right for the organisation. And I coach quite a lot of people who are coming up through the industry on what success looks like for them, because there isn't a cookie cutter blueprint. Everyone will do things differently, but I lead with purpose. So I have to really be clear that whatever I'm doing, there's a purpose to it at the end. The other aspect for me is autonomy. I have to have a high degree of autonomy. Okay. And as I say, hiring a leader like me, isn't for the faint-hearted, because I work at pace and not everyone can do that. So I always try and encourage people that I coach to make sure that they're really clear, about what they're doing, but then they know how they work, and making sure that the fit is going to be right for them in the organisation they go to. But the other aspects really is around the elements around challenge, and how much challenge you're willing to be able to absorb in the role that you're doing. And if it's too hard for me, it gets me really, really frustrated. If it's too easy, I get bored. So there is this middle ground of challenge that people need to really understand. But I really want to encourage anyone who's either an entrepreneur or working in corporate life to be clear around those elements, around how they actually work within an organisation.
And one of the questions I asked you before the podcast was about, advice given to entrepreneurs, to young, up-and-coming, ambitious people. And one of the things you said really struck me, where you mentioned building your business around your values and not just your goals. And I thought I haven't really heard that in that context before, but expand on that for me. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so everyone talks about success, and everyone wants to be successful. No one goes into business to be a failure. So the success is measured very, very differently by people. For me, it has to be led by values. You have to really be clear around, why am I here and how do I want to show up in whatever it is I'm doing? And that's showing up to not just your customers, but also your teams and to your business partners. So leading with values, and one value for me is integrity, and it has to be really, a core value for me. To do whatever you're doing, if you're not leading with integrity, in my view, then why are you doing it? It's not a core value. It doesn't serve my purpose. So I wouldn't do it. And that's what's been successful for me, is just having very clear views on what my values are.
And what about risks? I mean, you mentioned obviously a big percentage of programs, fail, and personally, of course, through anyone's career, you're gonna have your good days and your bad days, and successes and failures. What risks have you taken through your career that have paid off? I mean, in terms of not gambles, but calculated risks. What calculated risks have you taken through your career that spring to mind that have really paid off later?
Yeah, so I think one that that springs to mind for me was my leap into a CIO role.
Okay.
And it was a leap at a time where I was looking around. There was no one that looked like me or thought like me that was a CIO. So it was a big risk.
This is your first one?
This was my first one. This is my first one. And anyone who can go and look back on my career profile will know which company I'm talking about. But when I took the leap, I believed I was ready, but I didn't see anyone who looked like me. So I knew it was going to be a risk, because what I was actually proposing was around a digital transformation for the organisation. And I went in with really clear view on, this is how the organisation is currently being run. This is how we are going through our acquisitions of customers. And these are all the things where I believe technology can actually help enable, whether it's the process or the change within the organisation. So I had, in what I now look back and think through, a cookie cutter approach in terms of being a CIO. You have to have really clear vision, you have to build a team, and you have to execute flawlessly. And that was my approach. What I hadn't appreciated was that you're bringing it into the context of an organization that has legacy, that has a culture, that has different challenges from the industry that you've left. And you've really got to understand that. And that was a huge risk for me, because I left quite a secure role, a very comfortable role that I could have stayed. I knew I had a great network. I had trusted allies in the organisation. To leave and go somewhere else where you're unknown,
different industry,
you're different industry, different type of leadership style. It was a big risk, but I like taking risks.
But that can only come in time, can't it? For those up and coming CIOs that are there now in their career where you were,
Yeah.
I guess a better head on your shoulders around diversification and being dynamic and having an open approach to these things and appreciating cultural legacy, systems, data, ways of working. I guess if you're diplomatic in your approach and open-minded, then I guess one can only acquire that experience through time in working in different industries.
Yeah, you can't teach it.
Exactly.
You have to experience it.
Yeah.
And as I say, the failures gave me the best teachings than the successes. So I do believe that you have to take you have to take advice from people who've been there and done it. But you also have to watch. You have to be really observant around how people operate. But I like to be my authentic self. I lead in a different way. I think in a different way. And one of the things I would always say to entrepreneurs is surround yourself with people who think differently to you.
Absolutely.
Who lead differently to you in one respect, but also where you're going to actually come together as a team, like the Sir Alex Ferguson example, but you're going to bring people together as a team and everyone understands their position and their strengths and weaknesses.
I think there's a lot of gold to be had as well on reflections, because I think, particularly in a tough economy that we're in now globally, there's been a suppression on spend across the board. Of course, a record number of elections in 2024 has a big part to do with that. And we won't get into the Trump tariffs and other aspects that clearly directly impact our economies. But having seen that in both UK and Middle East offices, in different economies, it's really pinched a lot of businesses where digital transformation is still a priority, but I think there's a lot more careful spending going on in terms of how businesses spend money on that. But in terms of risks, just go back to the reflection point. I think it's quite healthy to, even if something hasn't worked out, or there are people listening where they're looking for their next project or their next role, or they can't nail that next CIO role and they're an established leader already. I think it's just having a bit of faith in the market, picking up and having a bit of a pendulum swing, and not being too hard on yourself about any failures or roles that didn't work out or projects that didn't go to plan. Because I think, personally, I started my first business when I was 24 years old in the legal sector, and we were selling searches to conveyancers, like selling data. And it was a great model. There's a not-for-profit sort of membership model behind it. And we weren't really in control of the bottom line costs, and it lasted about a year and it fell over, and that was quite embarrassing, because for me, as ambitious as I was then, but getting back into full-time work, start again from the bottom, as a rookie in that industry, but it led me to other things. So I'm a big believer in reflecting on like the failures and then picking out the gold, whether that's improving your business acumen, your commercial awareness, your financial, knowledge, whatever it is. But there's always wins, even in a mess like that.
There is. And again, one of the aspects of digital transformation is, as I said, about culture. It's the how you look at failure. And the fact that digital transformation is a continuous improvement process. You're continuously trying and testing things out. Not everything's going to work, and you have to get used to failure. But I call it learning. It's all a learning journey.
Absolutely.
And if you look at it through the lens of learning, what nuggets can I actually take out of that? What worked? What didn't work? Why didn't it work? What would I do differently? Again, continuous learning for me is all about that tried and tested process of really examining things and then deciding what are the elements that I can use in my next role. What are the things that worked really well? But anyone who's gone through any form of disappointment in a role, and now, to your point, there's a lot of challenging environments that we're in now. The aspect that they need to think through is, what is it they can control? You're not going to be able to control the world economy. You're not going to be able. No one can control Trump. I don't want to go down that road, but no one can control some of our world leaders who are making decisions. So the effect that you can do is, what are the aspects that you can actually bring into the work environment? Whether it's as an advisory, whether you're doing advisory roles that aren't remunerated, but you're helping organizations fix a problem. Think differently. Because every interaction you have can lead to an opportunity. You just don't know. You'll never know if you're in the right place at the right time, having the right conversations with someone that can take you, to your point, down a different road that you wouldn't have planned.
Yeah. I think curiosity has got to be a key ingredient for a good tech leader.
Yes.
If you stay curious and that always open to learning new things and new technologies, and how AI is becoming such a paramount conversation in tech. I mean, in 2025, have you seen much of that at the minute, like through your recent journeys, in the way that people talk about AI, and probably a lot of these sort of futurists you see, like, badge themselves up as the AI sort of futurists on LinkedIn. But I mean, what does it mean, like at a simplest sort of level, in terms of business adoption? How are businesses going about AI in particular?
Yeah, I remember having my first boardroom conversation about AI quite a few years ago, when it was, it was before the time of ChatGPT, and it put it on the radar. And literally got laughed out of the boardroom around it. Well, we don't understand what you're talking about, and it's not going to happen. Not in our lifetime, was one of the comments that I got. And roll forward not that many years, and look where we are today. The challenge with AI that not just businesses but society need to really understand is you cannot predict it. Part of my aspects around looking at human psychology is looking at how technology has evolved over the years. I discovered a fact a few months ago that fire, when it was discovered, it then took another 200 years before humans could use it for cooking. 200 years of innovation before they could use it for cooking. When the first flight took off, it then took 66 years before we landed on the moon. And then if you extrapolate that through AI, it's happening, innovation is happening not in months or years or weeks, in days, it's minutes. We can do things a lot quicker. And the aspect of machine learning is it's continuously improving, and which is really exciting for me. Where it really comes into its own is when businesses understand that in order to use it, culturally, their organizations, their human capital needs to be thinking differently about how you deploy people. Because, back in the days where you would hire someone because of what they knew, you've now got AI.
Absolutely.
Coding is going to be done by AI better than it does by humans, because you don't have to go through the arduous, testing process that you would with a human code development. So what are people going to then do? If they're not coders, what's their role going to be in the future? AI can do things, and with agentic AI, it's going to be doing a lot more than AI has ever done. But you still need humans over it. You still need the sentient view of, what would this actually mean if we did this? What will it mean for our customers, our passengers, our employees, our shareholders? So you need that business thinking behind it. But you no longer, I want to hire an AI guru to do my accounts and to do my legal, looking over contracts and doing those sorts of things. You're not going to pay someone to do that now that you can use AI to do it, but you'll still need someone to look over the end results.
I think it will certainly take over jobs for sure, but I think it will create a lot as well.
Of course.
And I think the more, not slightly more arduous roles, but a paralegal that are checking contracts, of course, I don't think that's going to, and the same thing for coders, right? And gone are the days where you're going to need to spend 20 grand to build an app. And Google have just released only this week, their new platforms on building apps. And so I think it's fast paced, and it's a really interesting point you made about, the first flight took off on X, and it was another 60 plus years until we landed on the moon. And I think the accelerations in adoption of technologies is such an interesting point of conversation. I always remember the earliest forms of AI that actually were presented were predictive messaging on text messages, predictive text that we take for granted now and probably get frustrated about. And even the little paperclip, you know, on the Microsoft Office, Microsoft Word, you had the little paperclip.
Yes,
And that was still an early form of AI, you know,
Yeah.
in actually having an interaction and a helpful sort of assistant in navigating certain Microsoft products. So I think the acceleration we've seen in the last sort of few years has really put it on the map and enable people to start adopting some of these AI technologies.
Yeah, but this isn't new. I mean, again, if you look back over history, the first industrial revolution,
Yeah.
when machinery came into the workforce in the looms,
Yeah,
you know, everyone
absolutely.
was up in arms with their pitchforks saying,
Yeah.
"You're getting rid of our jobs."
Yeah.
But the reality is, as you go through all of the innovation, when electricity, when cooling came in, when manufacturing and production of lines came in with car manufacturing,
Yeah.
it all means that people's jobs change. That's all that happens. So rather than, you know, people who were doing manual works, they now become machinists.
Yeah.
And then they become machine operators and, you know, machine
Absolutely.
managers. And,
Yeah.
you know, it it just
Yeah.
goes on and on.
Yeah.
So we're in another fourth industrial revolution if we take the World Economic Forum's predictions.
Yeah.
We're now in the fourth economic.
Agreed. Yeah.
So the issue that we now have to think through is, how are people's jobs going to be changing? What skill sets will they now need to build? And for the guys that I'm coaching, and you know, young, especially young females who are looking to get into the industry, I said, look, focus on AI. You know, become a prompt engineer.
Yeah.
That's really a core skill. Focus on cybersecurity, because the more we go on the internet, the more secure we need to be. And the third thing is cloud technology, because these are the areas I think are the key aspects where people are going to be more prevalent.
And that's to the people side in terms of progression and succession. What about to the business? You know, when if a board are stuck, as you said, like the old board meetings where you know everybody gets sort of laughed out the door on AI. But now we're in 2025. AI is being taken seriously, and we know that it's going to interface and interact with many components of the business. What advice or what obvious points would you make to a business in Exco that are talking about AI and have an appetite for adoption of new AI technology? What are the key things that a business should be thinking about, you know, when considering like AI innovation, would you say?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges businesses always look into is the control. So everyone wants to put governance around it, wants policies in place, want to stop people from using it. But the reality is people use it at home, you know, and they take their work aspects into their home life, which isn't secure. So you don't want people taking business documents and putting it through ChatGPT on their home machines, because you've then lost complete control of your data. So what businesses really need to think through is the frameworks and the guardrails that needs to be put in place to enable people to do their best work whilst really utilising the tools. So again, this is really where culture comes in.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Clearly it comes in, because you have to allow people and give them the autonomy to be able to do the work, but within the guardrails that you need to set up.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, and I think the appetites for AI, you know, it can be I imagine it can be quite a scary adoption. Like, it could be a really scary thing to think about. You know, a business that's always worked well successfully, and you know, feel like they're going to almost compete with AI. So they better adopt it quickly before they become a competition to it. Yeah, for me, it feels like a pivotal year or two, like a pivotal time.
It's absolutely pivotal. The next year, because especially with the agentic AI, the next year, 12 months, it's going to be phenomenal change for organisations. And one of the aspects is, we talked about continuous change. You have to start and not try and control every element of it. Just start, you know, move forward, make the first step, and then just keep learning through that. But organisations haven't got any real control over especially over their data or how their employees are using it. It just becomes the Wild West for them. So there is this fine balance between, you know, doing stuff, but doing it in a controlled way with the
Yeah.
right guardrails in place that enables people to do their best work. And what businesses need to really consider is this
Yeah.
is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
Where there's been manual processes or failures because people are working in a way that you can't often predict.
Yeah.
With AI, you can predict quite a
Yeah.
lot. And that's the aspect that businesses need to take from this.
You've got to keep it in like innovation, haven't you? Like
Yes.
you've got to keep it, and even if the innovation going on in a business wasn't that great or that visible right now, then it gives you like the key to the door to become quite innovative and start thinking about new technologies. And fundamentally cannot replace authenticity in a business or identity, because I think that's a trap that we see already that people fall into, even on an individual level. Certain business leaders, they know who they are, where that it's okay to use GPT and these AIs to make certain posts which should come from within authentically, like this is your view, your values, and you're passionate about ABC.
Yes.
And being outspoken, but it's written by AI is a risky thing because you lose your authenticity.
Yes.
And even to the point of, I've seen forums and conversations and comments on certain posts on LinkedIn where you see the reply is also constructed by AI.
Yes.
And you just think like, surely it takes a bit more time to, copy a link. What would you say to this? And then you get a reply and you throw it back. But for me, there's a big risk in losing who you are, like your own authenticity, which is probably the most important ingredient for us as a business, is authenticity.
Yeah.
Where people know what your capability is, what your values are, and you're authentic to that,
Yeah. And that's the human side.
Yeah.
So the difference between AI and a sentient being like humans is that authenticity and that feeling.
Yeah.
And people can see through
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
I won't say it, but people can see through it.
Yeah.
And unless you're authentic and you're giving a message that is clear that you really feel passionate about it.
Yeah.
Because people feel the passion.
Yeah.
And if you can get that out, then that's really where your message really lands well.
Yeah.
And I think for organizations that aren't using the technology in an authentic way and really understanding how it betters their customers and their shareholders and their employees, then it's lost.
Yeah.
They've lost the race.
I think if we're talking about a TOM development program, a big target operating model sort of transformation program, and then injecting some AI capability, and that is obviously a far bigger business-wide significant step change to the way that they do things.
Yes.
But is there lower hanging fruit with AI, across maybe core office functions, across HR, finance, and BAU sort of IT and operations? Do you see for businesses there's lower hanging fruit available when adopting some of those simple AI technologies?
Yeah, you start with the processes that are repetitive, that you can do over and over again, and very, very time consuming, especially when you're pulling information together from various sources, and someone manually has to do that, and manually has to do comparators, and then manually has to then send that out to the right audience and get responses, or not long ago in an organization, physically walk around the building to get wet signatures on. I mean, these sorts of things should literally be outdated. They are things that AI and digital transformation tools now can actually help organizations become a lot more efficient. And that's what you're looking for. You want to strip out the non-value added tasks that people are doing today that AI can just replace, and then focus people on doing the value added things, the authentic things that are really going to help make a difference with how your business runs. That's the difference, I think. You don't want to just pay for bums on seats. You have to, and with IT operating models specifically, and with business operating models widely, you really have to think about where's the value add in this role being in this organization, and how can technology actually help make it more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point, and it's certainly an interesting one, because I think it's a topic that people are still quite nervous about, still quite slightly scared about, and I think actually there's some real I've seen many businesses really transform and straighten up a lot of their process maps with HR functions and simple onboarding processes, and just the day-to-day finance functions. So I think there's a lot of automation happening already, and it's interesting. It becomes not quite a race, but I think it is such a highly competitive industry, and technology is only going to accelerate that competitiveness.
Yeah, and it will. But again, it's down to culture.
Yeah.
You know, if an organisation is running those functions with people who don't want to make the change, it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
You can spend millions and millions on getting the new systems in, but unless you change the way you operate, this is just, you're spending a lot of money to manually run processes that are already running now.
And I just want to cover off fractional works, because I think fractional CIO is a term that's used a lot in industry. Do you believe, are you a supporter of that? Are you a believer in the value and what a fractional CIO can do for a business as opposed to one that's there permanently 5 days a week?
Yeah, fractional CIOs bring a different way of thinking into an organisation. It's almost like injecting an organisation and turbocharging it.
Yeah.
And that's the way organisations need to think about fractional CIOs, because there is a task that needs to be done, which is different way of working to how the organisations currently work. You can't do that with existing staff, especially people who've been in the organisation a long time, because unfortunately you don't know what you don't know. And bringing a fractional CIO who has been there, done it, and also can see things differently through a different lens can often accelerate organisations much quicker. And that's the way to look at this. This is about acceleration.
So it could be a good way to bring in a change or transformation SME, rather than thinking about a heavy-hitting CIO, a top-band salary, and then maybe outsourcing some of that program to one of those big consultancies. I think that's the space that the fractional CIOs created in the market. And we've got, many established CIOs, yourself included, who are plugged into our community partners platform. And I think we've seen certainly a spike in that activity where businesses can see the value of engaging someone almost as a critical friend, through a change journey or through innovation. Like they want to get to there, and hand-holding might be some of it. But I think there's huge value when we talk about changing the way that advisory is delivered. I see that as a really clear part, in engaging on a fractional basis.
Yeah, the problem is it's a big commitment to get a CIO in, a heavy hitting CIO into an organisation, because you've got to embed that CIO into the organisation. You don't know whether the body's going to reject the organ that you just implanted. So being the fractional CIO is an element of being able to do things very, very quickly, but without the risk to the rest of the organisation, and everyone understands their role. Everyone's signed up for it, and you can almost test and learn to see whether or not it's going to work.
And I just wanted to finish off in terms of, we've covered some good ground on entrepreneurs and up and coming CIOs and ones that aspire, and the coaching that you're already doing, with younger generations where they're coming through the ranks. What would be the maybe top 2 or 3 tips, points that you would give those people beyond, on reflection of this podcast and what we've discussed, but what would you say, off the bat would be the sort of top 2 or 3 things that you would say would be like critical advice or really important things to double down on beyond what you've said already? Yeah,
I would say that, having worked in this industry for many, many years and seen both successes and failures and what works well and where things need to change, you have to be really okay with failure. If you're going in to do something and you're thinking that it has, it's going to be a success, that's a very, very dangerous road, because success is subjective, and the aspects that make things successful are many, and there's too many variables to really be able to guarantee whether or not you're successful. So you have to really be understanding of culture, and you have to lead with culture, and that includes purpose and vision and values. But you also have to really be clear around the teams that you're working with and teams you're building have to be diverse. You cannot simply build a successful team with people who are all thinking the same.
The same as you.
Because you don't get the innovation, you don't get the fresh ideas coming in. So that's what I would really encourage is, lead with purpose, values and vision, and make sure you very quickly build a very diverse team.
It's a really good point. And I think a lot of leaders, business owners or leaders, fall into that trap where they just think it's like, to use your term, like cookie cutter, like there's just another one of you. And if you've done well on one certain thing, you need another one of you.
Yeah.
But actually, like the greater value is someone that can hold the mirror up and maybe highlight a few inefficiencies, or here's how you can really optimize what you're doing, or teach you some stuff, And I think that's the important thing is to surround yourself with people that can really teach you how to do it better as well.
And challenge you. You don't want everyone around you who's got a groupthink mentality and just nodding and agreeing, because that's not where you become an extraordinary person. You have to push the boundaries.
Yeah. You've got to leave your ego at the door.
Oh, absolutely. You have to leave egos at the door and titles at the door.
Yeah.
You can't have the hierarchies.
No.
You have to really have people,
Agreed.
as I say, come together as a team.
Yeah.
And this is really where, and I keep harping on about Sir Alex Ferguson, but he said exactly the same thing. The changing room, you leave your ego behind the door.
Yeah.
You come in and you're playing as part of a team.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's next for you in terms of where you're in your career and the ambitions? What's the next step for you?
Yeah, well, I always describe myself as a game changer. I'm a game changer CIO, and for me, going in to organisations, my purpose is to help them use technology to ensure that they build growth or engagements with their customers and with their employees.
Yeah. And
that's really what gives me the buzz.
Yeah.
So my next roles are going to be more around advisory, fractional CIO. I love that term.
Yeah.
But I want to go into organisations to help, whether it's a board advisor, whether it's as a NED role, whether it's a fractional CIO. My task is to help organisations grapple with the transformation of continuous improvements through digital technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that will give you a different work-life balance too, where I guess everybody will get to a point in their career where they want to perhaps pivot a little bit and get more involved in fractional work as opposed to the full-time sort of 12-hour days that we've all been used to.
Yeah, and pivoting is, to your question earlier about the risks that we've taken, it is a big risk because jumping from an exec role that's very safe in one respect because you get the security around it, to insecure areas where I'm going to have to do a lot of work to build my portfolio.
Yeah.
But it's an exciting aspect. And, I love to do the innovation, and I want to work with organisations that want to do the innovation and that want to think and lead differently.
It's a big challenge, but
it is. It's
one to thrive in. Exactly. Yeah. And how does for the listeners that maybe not be familiar with the Community Partners model, how does that Community Partners platform help support you, as an advisor, being able to offer a much wider capability to your clients, your customers? What does it mean to you to be part of that sort of wider community setting?
Yeah, if you think through the old consulting model, where you have an army of people that don't have the depth of experience within the organisation that are brought in to help organisations transform. In the Community Partners model, you have people who've been there and done it, and also have lots and lots of great learning and skill sets that I don't have that I can then tap into. So it brings in the diversity of leadership that's needed to be able to help deliver, and it means that we can go quicker, faster, because that's the key aspect. You don't want to be learning how to do something, on the job, because ultimately you're burning time, you're burning money, and to your point earlier, a lot of people don't have the budgets and luxury. So if you can bring in almost a team in a box style model, where you're bringing in people that've already got the expertise, you can accelerate how you deliver.
I think that critical friend model, I think, is the way that it is changing too. I think, the stereotypical big consulting firm, they sneak a few grads in, and eventually they get found out, sooner or later. Whereas I think it's important to have trusted SMEs that they can tap into at source.
Yes.
And without having to worry too much about overspending, they can be a critical friend. And it might be a requirement where it's 2 or 3 days a week, or 5 days a month, whatever the ad hoc. Maybe it ramps up through the project and ramps back down again.
And it's going to be based on referrals as well, because if you don't do a great job, you very quickly, as you say, you quickly found out.
Absolutely.
So the model means that we lead with the authenticity of, we're here to do a great job. Yeah. We've been there in your side of the fence. We know what it looks like from the cold face. What we're here to do is to actually help you get there quicker.
Yeah. Well, look, we're lucky to have you as a community partner, and thank you so much for joining us today.
No, it's been a pleasure. It's been great talking.
Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Matt.
Cheers.